Okay guys, so today we're going to talk about the Real Estate Services Act, which is 1.3. And this chapter is specifically about all the entities that have been created that we need to be a part of. So we're going to talk about the council, we're going to talk about the act, we're going to talk about the brokerage, we're going to talk about all these interesting things. And it's actually very relatable because then later on you know, when you're going to get to become an agent, you're going to hear about all these things, and it's just having a little bit of information about it right now, it's a good idea. So, levels of licensing. So when you're going to get your license, the question you're going to ask is, which brokerage should I join, right? And that's usually every student's question, every agent that's always, you know, asking which brokerage. And brokerages are quite interesting. So when they say RE/MAX, it's actually, okay, great, RE/MAX is there, but RE/MAX has so many different locations. So if I'm a part of RE/MAX, it doesn't mean that we're all in the same brokerage. I could be a part of RE/MAX Abbotsford, and my friend could be a part of RE/MAX South Surrey. That is separate brokerages, because brokerages are based off what? It's based off the physical location. The brand that we operate under might be the same. So if we're thinking about RE/MAX, RE/MAX is a brand, but there's so many different offices that RE/MAX has, and it's all based off those physical locations that we join. And reason being is that every brokerage has a different managing broker, and every different managing broker runs the brokerage a little bit differently, right? So, and on the exam, they might ask you, what is a brokerage, right? They might ask you for the definition. It's actually a licensee that provides services on behalf of the brokerage. So a brokerage is actually considered a licensee itself, right? And we agents are going to be a part of this brokerage, right? And you have to understand that every client that we bring in, or every buyer that we are working with, or a listing we bring in, it's actually the brokerage that owns it. It's not really us. They're not ours. We don't own the listings. We don't own the buyers. The brokerages are owning it, right? And reason being is because we're repping the brokerage, right? We are the ones that are acting as the reps, and we are giving the services on behalf of the brokerage. And then, like I said, the brokerages are going to be managed by a managing broker. Think of it like an office manager. So this guy over here is going to be the one who's going to be looking at all the managing brokerage's accounts. He's going to be supervising all the licensees. He is in charge of managing all the business that comes and goes out of the brokerage itself. And on the exam, there's always one question on the managing broker, and what they do is they ask you, who is a managing broker? Or they might just ask you a definition. A managing broker is a licensee who's responsible for the brokerage, has control, and conducts and supervises the agents. So that's a must-know definition there, right? And sometimes the brokerage is very big, and then you might have an associate broker. So if you think of a retail shop, you might think of, you know, a retail manager. That could be the managing broker, and then the assistant manager would be the associate broker. So this guy over here is usually just assisting the managing broker to just make sure all the work is complete, and he's able to just kind of get through the entire day with it, right? And then lastly, there's us. There's a reps, right? Which is you and I, right? And we are the ones that are representing the brokerage. That's why we're called reps, right? And we are just employed to sell and buy real estate. We don't own any of the clients. We do not own any of the listings. And that's a very important thing that you do need to know about it, right? So, like I said here, the responsibility of the managing broker, because one question usually shows up. So you might want to know this, right? So a managing broker is a licensee that's responsible for managing the brokerage, of course. And they also, you know, have to exercise the rights over the brokerage as well. He controls and conducts all the business that is happening, right, in the brokerage and leaving the brokerage. And he supervises the licensees that are coming and going, right? And he has the ability to employ us and fire us. So if he doesn't like us, he can get rid of us. If he wants us to be a part of his team, he will ask us to be, right? And like I said, the brokerage's books and all that stuff is managed by the managing broker, the accounts, the records, and they're always submitted to the council. So they usually are cross-checked, right? And he's responsible for the agent's actions. And if we go back right here, we know that our clients are all owned by the brokerage here. And they're the ones who take all that, right? So if we leave, the clients are supposed to stay with the brokerage, right? But do you see how it's an upside down triangle? So we're always protected as well. So if we are the ones repping the brokerage, they also have the obligation to take responsibility for actions as well. And that's called vicarious liability. So if we do something wrong, our brokerage is also going to be responsible for it as well. The last thing right here I want to bring your attention to is a must have a managing broker whose license will determine the services the brokerage is permitted to offer. So if you join a brokerage where your managing broker is only licensed to give real estate services, then that brokerage will only be selling and buying real estate. The agents will only be that. But let's say if you join a brokerage where your managing broker has a property management license and a real estate license, then that brokerage will be giving property management services and real estate services. So he can hold all three licenses. He can have a strata, property management, real estate, whatever it is. There's no conflict of interest, right? And so you can as well. You can also hold those licenses. But it's all up to what the managing broker is experienced in and where his competency is. And that's how the brokerage always usually runs, right? And like I mentioned, the brokerage will be vicariously liable for fraud committed by the brokerage's employee. It may also be disciplining the real estate counsel, right? So like I said, we are under the umbrella. So we are also representing the brokerage, but anytime anything happens, the brokerage also protects us as well. So qualifications for a licensing, right? So how can we become licensed and who can become licensed, right? We cannot, what is an infant, right? An infant is like I have a child's photo right here, right? So that usually basically means that we have to be an infant is someone who's under the age of 19. If you are 19 or above, you can easily get licensed, right? But if you're under the age of 19, you cannot get licensed. Now, granted, there's a lot of infants that do come through and they are studying to be real estate agents. That's fine. You can go for the examination. You can do all that. But you just cannot hold the piece of paper or the license in your hand until you're actually 18 or above. So the qualifications for licensing is what, right? So it's very similar between the licensee and the managing broker. So you have to be, of course, 19 years of age, right? So you cannot be an infant. Of course, you have to have a good reputation, and you also have to meet educational requirements, which is exactly what you guys are doing right now, trying to study for the exam and write it and so forth. On the qualifications of the managing broker side, it's very similar. You see that 19 years of age, be of good reputation. The only one that is a little bit different is the licensed experience that the managing broker needs. He needs 2 years of licensed experience. So on the exam, sometimes what they do is they play with this number. Sometimes they'll give you 3, sometimes they'll give you 4 or 5. Just make sure that you know that the managing broker needs 2 years of licensed experience. And of course, he has it when you're going to become a managing broker, you have your own educational and requirements to meet under the rules. Another question that they're going to ask you on the managing broker side is whether a managing broker has to be a Canadian citizen or a permanent resident holder, right? So a PR holder. And that's usually a false statement. Reason being is because you don't need to be a Canadian citizen or a PR holder. You can actually just go for the license and write the examination and get your managing broker license and so forth, and you can continue to do that. For a licensee, you actually have a 2-year term. So our licenses are valid for 2 years. Every 2 years, we have to renew the license, right? And you can only work for one brokerage at a time. So if I'm working for Remax South Surrey and I want to go and join a team in Remax Abbotsford, I can't do that. I can only work for one brokerage at a time. And a brokerage is basically by its physical location. Remax is just the brand. All the other locations that come underneath are going to be the brokerages. And like I said, clients will be in the name of your brokerage. You don't own any types of listings. You don't own your buyer's agents. You don't own any of them. You are just simply repping the brokerage and you're just a designated agent. That's all you are. You don't own any of your clients. And you can only do services permitted by the brokerage. Like I mentioned, that if your managing broker is only a real estate agent, then that brokerage will only give real estate services. And if he has a real estate license and a property management license and a strata, then you can do all three. And then the last one, only accept remuneration from your brokerage. So sometimes you do a really good job for your buyers and your buyers are very impressed with your work. So they want to give you a box of wine, or they want to give you some sort of spa packages, or they want to do something to make you happy, right? Just to return the favor. And they'll try to give it to you while you're, on completion or whatever it may be. You actually cannot take that, because if you take it, that counts as a secret profit. And you need to actually tell them that, listen, I thank you for doing this, but you need to give it through my brokerage. The brokerage actually needs to know about all the bonuses or gifts or anything like that we're getting, because if we don't, then it becomes a disciplinary issue and it's considered a secret profit, which we're not allowed to do. So let's do this question. The requirement in BC that a real estate agent must possess a license is set out by who? So this is usually standard, right? It's usually the provincial government that is in charge of all the licenses and the regulations that they put into place around education. So all the designations that there are in the world, right, accounting and all that, finance and all that stuff that we do have, it's all designated by the provincial government, right? So if you hop from one province to another, it's going to change. So Ontario might have a different, regulations. BC has different. Calgary might have different. So Alberta might have different. So all these places are regulated by the provincial government or the provincial statute. 3 real estate services, right? So this is something that has been showing up on the exam. And what this basically means is that they're defining what real estate services really mean. So we think that real estate is just buying and selling, right? But real estate is expanded into these 3 different definitions here, right? And what is the 3 real estate services under the RESA, which is the Real Estate Services Act? So the first one is what a real estate agent does, which is the trading services. So this is where we sell or buy property, research opportunities, do open houses and stuff like that. That's what a trading service rep is for, right? The second one is rental property management. And this is where, you go get your property management license. And this is where you collect rents, negotiate, make payments, collecting strata fees, all that, right? This is what a property management is. And the third one is strata management. And this is becoming very popular because of all the strata buildings that are coming up. And this is where you're managing on behalf of the owner. You are making payments, negotiating, supervising contracts and all that, right? All 3 of them require a separate license, and you can have a license for all 3 of them as well, right? So there's no conflict of interest either. But the way the real estate services is defined, it's not only just selling real estate and buying a trading services. It's actually all 3 of them where real estate is a part of. And services are, like I said, are provided on behalf of your brokerage. So you technically are not going to be owning your listings or your buyers. It's all your brokerage owns all of them, right? And then exceptions to a real estate license. Who doesn't need a real estate license, right? So anybody for sale by owner, someone who is selling the property on his or her own for sale by owner doesn't need a real estate license, right? Because they're not they're not really working for somebody or anything. They're just selling their own property. Collection agents, notaries, accountants, appraisers, anybody that's not selling real estate or could be involved in a part of the real estate transaction doesn't need a real estate license. We real estate agents do if we're selling it. That's what we do. But this is the one that I want you guys to know is a person acting on behalf of a developer. If a developer has a huge townhouse complex, he usually hires his own real estate agent, and that person is only allowed to sell the developer's properties. He's not allowed to go and help clients come in and search for other properties elsewhere. He's only selling that specific one for the developer. So which of the following are 3 categories of real estate services as defined in the Real Estate Services Act, right? So we know in this question, it's going to be rental property management, strata management, and trading services, right? So this is a correct answer, but number 1 is not correct because brokerage services and agency services have nothing to do with real estate. We know that there's no brokerage services in this one, and we know brokerage services and licensing services it doesn't make any sense. So we know it's option 2 here. Team members, so real estate teams, right? So how do teams work? So teams are becoming very popular to do real estate business with, right? And you need to have at least 2 licensed people on the team in order to actually form a team, right? And they both need to be licensed, and the team names and the team member names need to be registered with the council in writing as well, right? And they all need to be a part of the same brokerage. So if I'm a part of Remax Abbotsford and my friend's a part of White Rock, we cannot make a team because we're from different brokerages, even though the brand is the same, but we're from different brokerages. We need to actually go into one brokerage to basically make a team, right? Team names and team members must be registered with the council, right? It is the obligation to advise the council in writing if a team member joins or if a team member leaves. So in order for you to register your team name and your members, everything needs to be put into writing so the council can keep track of that. And like I said, all advertisements that include names of unlicensed team members must be identified as being unlicensed. So the council doesn't have enough time to go through all of our advertisements. They are just simply, trusting the brokerage will be doing the right thing. So if you have someone who's unlicensed on your advertisement, you need to actually state that this person is unlicensed on the advertisement. And team is collectively the agent for the client and cannot separate agency. So for example, if me, Melanie, and Yana were one team, and Yana has a listing and I have an interested buyer, my buyer will not be able to put an offer on her listing because that will be a conflict of interest. We would have to either drop the listing or we would have to drop the buyer in order to actually make the transaction happen. Reason being because a team is operating as one agent, it's operating as one entity. So you can only have a listing and then you would have to pass on the buyer to somebody else. You can't have two clients being interested in the same property. It just doesn't work that way. Which of the following are general guidelines the Real Estate Council of BC follows with respect to teams and team names? So let's look at number one. It says licensed team members can be licensed by different brokerages. So you cannot, like I mentioned to you guys, you cannot be a part of a team if you're in a different brokerage. Right? So we know A is false. So we're going to cross out, we're going to do the method of elimination. So it's 1 and 2, it gets crossed out immediately, right? So now both of us have they have B and C, and we're going to look at D, right? So D is unlicensed team members who appear in a team advertising do not have to be identified as unlicensed. So we know in this question, this one is false because they have to be identified in advertising, right? You can't just, not advertise and put an unlicensed person on there and not say that this is not unlicensed, right? You have to basically let them know. So we know D is false, so then we know in this it's B and C. But if you look at B, it says licensed team members must advise the council in writing that if somebody leaves or joins a team. So this is very important. You have to let the council know in writing. And number C, no team name will be approved that is identical to an existing approved team name. So if you decide to call your team X, Y, and Z, and it's already an X, Y, and Z team, you can't have the same name. The names need to be different, right? So according to the RESA and regulations, which of the following statements is true? So RESA is called the Real Estate Services Act, and I'll explain that to you guys as we go forward. Which of the following statements is true? That's what they're asking us. So if you look right here, number 1, an individual may commence trading in real estate immediately after receiving proof of passing the real estate licensing exam. Unfortunately, that's not how it goes, right? We still have other, loopholes to go through, right? So it's not immediately. Immediately is a very strong word. You cannot just select that because we want to stay away from, strong words like that. And then number 2, all staff employed by a real estate brokerage must be registered with the Real Estate Council. So a lot of the people at the brokerage are agents, but there are also support staff. So there's also admin staff, conveyancers, and all that. Those people are not registered with the council. That is a false statement because we don't register admin staff. They're just normal employees who are on the payroll. And between 3 and 4, we know it's going to be 4. And the reason number 3 is wrong because it says an individual may be registered independently as a real estate rep without being employed by a registered real estate brokerage. So we actually can't do that. Once we get our license, we actually have to hang it at a brokerage itself. We do not operate independently. It's just the rules of the council, and that's what we need to follow. We know number 4 is true because a real estate rep is employed by his or her brokerage to trade in real estate in the brokerage's name or on behalf of the brokerage's client, which is true because we are employed to rep the brokerage, and the clients that we're bringing in or that are coming in are actually the brokerage's clients. To qualify for a managing broker's license in BC, a person must meet which of the following requirements? So they're asking which one do we need to meet. So let's look at number 1. It says submit personal financial statements for each licensee they intend to hire. So you actually don't need to do that. We know that one's false. We don't have to submit personal financial statements for each licensee. It just doesn't make sense, right? And then number 3, if you look at that, it says 3 years licensed experience in BC. And if you guys remember, it should actually be 2 years of licensed experience, not 3 years, right? So they always play with this number on the exam. So the answer here is going to be a B of good reputation. Of course, they want that. So which of the following is not a Real Estate Services Act under the RESA, right? So we know that, let's look at these ones. So let's see, number 2, collecting rent from tenants in a residential building in Burnaby for an owner who lives in Singapore. So this is something called property management. That's something that is a Real Estate Services Act. Now look at number 3, selling a Penticton property for an owner who lives in Victoria. That is exactly what we real estate agents do. We do all that, right? So our job is to trade property, buy or sell. And number 4, assisting the sale of the condo unit located in Vancouver but owned by a person who lives in Calgary, right? So that is something that we do as well. We want to assist in sales. So we know 2, 3, and 4 is a Real Estate Service Act, but this is not something it is, because construction has nothing to do with real estate. That's a development thing, right? Property development. Under the regulations to the RESA, certain categories of a person are exempted from the licensing requirements contained in the Act. Which of the following is not covered by an exemption under Section 2? So they're specifically asking you who does not need a license, right? So if we look at all these options right here, if you look at the first one, it says an executive with Hudson's Bay Company selling a neighbor's house for a flat fee. So in this question, it's pretty clear if you look at the other ones as well, like if we just read them, it says an individual providing a property inspection. This person doesn't need a real estate license because he's doing property inspection. This guy right here is an accountant. Accountants don't need real estate licenses. They need their own accounting designations. And then this one, number 4, is a full-time salaried employee in Megaland Company selling houses in a 3,000 house tract developed in Megaland Company. So it looks like he's working with the developer. Like I mentioned to you guys before, somebody who works with the developer doesn't need a license, right? But this one, if we come back to it, an executive with the Hudson's Bay Company selling a neighbor's house for a flat fee. So wherever there's a flat fee involved or some sort of monetary gain happens, and it's something to do with real estate, then yes, you definitely do need to have a real estate license. Question 7, page 6. According to the Real Estate Services Act, which statements is false? So let's look at this one. Number 1, a brokerage must have a managing broker. Yes, that is true. A brokerage will not run without a managing broker. So a managing broker is very vital to a brokerage. He or she conducts all the business that happens there. So this one is, of course, true. And we're looking for the false answer here, right? So number 2, when using a license, the Real Estate Council may impose restrictions of the licensee's license, right? At this point, we know that if something happens, they can impose restrictions on us, right? If they need to. The council can do anything. And I'll explain about the council a little bit later. The council is actually our boss, so we have to follow all the rules and regulations, and they have the free will to do whatever they like sometimes, right? Especially if we're about to get into trouble or so. Number 3, an individual may be registered independently as a real estate rep without being employed by a real estate brokerage. And we've already covered this option in the previous question as before. We know that we cannot operate as an independent real estate agent. Reason being is because we need to put our license through an actual brokerage, and that's just the council rules, and we have to follow those. So you cannot be registered independently as a real estate licensee. A real estate rep is engaged by his or her brokerage to trade in real estate services in the brokerage's name or on behalf of the brokerage's client, which is of course true. Emphasizing it again, that clients are all owned by the brokerage. They're not the real estate agent's clients. And the real estate agent is the one who's repping the brokerage. So now we're going to do the Real Estate Services Act, which we call RESA, right? And the Real Estate Services Act is actually established by the government itself to regulate us further. It's a statute, right? So what do they do? What is the act specifically trying to get at for? They basically want to make sure that all the licensees that are reasonably competent, right? So they want to know or they want to make sure that anything that we do, we're doing it with a good level of skill and knowledge, right? And the number 2 is to ensure that real estate licensees are of good reputation. So they want everybody with a good reputation to come in, somebody who hasn't done any type of, rigorous or any type of criminal activity and all that sort, right? So, but a good reputation is important for the RESA as well. The third one is to discipline and where necessary re-educate real estate licensees if they breach the provisions of the Act. So sometimes things happen, and sometimes we may have forgotten something and we need to be retrained on a specific concept, and they take a very big interest in that. So they want to make sure that our education is constantly happening. We're making sure we're up to date with all the new bylaws that are happening and all the laws and regulations that the council puts into place, right? So now let's do this, right? So who is the RESA and what is the RESA, or the Real Estate Services Act? The simplest way that I can put it is that we call it the God, right? So a Real Estate Services Act is the God. So we really don't know where it is, what it's doing. It's untouchable, but it's up there and it's watching us constantly, right? And RESA is the only one that is able to establish entities for us. So it's not you're gonna have questions, who establishes who? RESA, or the Real Estate Services Act, is the only, you can say thing or substance that's up in the air somewhere that we can't touch or see or even talk to, is establishing everything. And like if you take God, for example, he's written the Bible for us, and then we have to follow the Bible, right? All the rules and regulations, these are your good deeds, these are your bad deeds, right? And what God does is that he gives us a boss, he gives us a mom, he gives us a family, he gives us all these different people to make sure that we stay in check. And that's exactly what the RESA has done here as well. They've given us the council, they've given us a superintendent as well, the foundation, the errors and omission, and compensation fund. All these entities have been established by the RESA. So let's look at this guy. This is a big bad, boss of ours right here, right? Like the grumpy guy. So the Real Estate Council and the Superintendent of Real Estate, they're the bosses, right? They're the ones who enforce the act, right? So if we look right here, the Real Estate Council enforces the act. So they enforce the RESA on us. So all the rules and regulations that are listed or, illustrated in the RESA, their job is to make sure that we follow those, right? Their main purpose usually is, if I want you guys to highlight this part right here, the main purpose is to supervise and advance the education qualifications of the licensees. They're very much interested in our competency level. They're very much interested in our skill sets, right? So they want to make sure that every year or, every couple of years, we make sure that we go and get re-educated on a specific topic. We might need to take a class, or might need to get retrained. So they take this very seriously. And of course, they're the ones who issue and renew and suspend our licenses. So when you guys are going to be applying for your license, you guys are going to be putting an application to the council. And they issue, renew, suspend, reprimand, cancel, suspend, and do anything to the license. They're in charge of all that stuff, right? And then, of course, they have the levying fees on all licensees to meet the council's expense. So the fees that we pay every 2 years. So the first year is going to be $1,800, and the second, after 2 years, is going to be $1,500. So a little bit of a portion of that is going to go towards the council's expenses. And then, of course, they investigate before or after you've received your license. So they have, like the boss, they have, they can investigate us whenever, right? They don't need an actual court order to come after and investigate us. If we do something wrong, they can just come right there and they can just, investigate into our transactions and start looking and digging deep whenever they like, right? And when I say court order, I'm not actually talking about the Supreme Court of BC. I'm actually talking about the Financial Services Tribunal. That is the court that they directly deal with. It's not the Supreme Court of BC, actually. And then, of course, there's 16 members on the council, and the way we like you guys to remember that is Sweet 16, right? So like a Sweet 16 birthday, so it's Sweet 16 members, right? So, and they're all brokers, lay members, realtors, and they're all hired by the Lieutenant Governor in council. And they're the ones who are making the bylaws that establish the information on the licensing application. So they're in charge of all that stuff there, right? And they can hold disciplinary hearings. They can, if we've done something wrong, they can call us in and, have all these disciplinary meetings with us and make sure that, they slap our wrist if we've done anything wrong, right? And one of the things I want you guys to remember is that there's no such thing that the council deals with is law reform or code of ethics. So no law reform and no code of ethics. Council does not deal with that. Their main job is to enforce the act and to make sure that we're advancing in our licensing requirements and our education. Those are the main two things that they do. And of course, along the lines, they take away our licenses, renew them, they issue them, they suspend it, whatever they need to do. They're the ones who are in charge of doing that. So we just got a new boss lately, a few years ago. He's called the Office of the Superintendent of Real Estate. So this guy over here, he was put into power a few years ago. And what he does is that he oversees the operations of the council. So he takes a look as to see if the council is doing everything right. It's not like he jumps into their dealings or anything like that. He just basically, oversees it. And if we get investigated by him or anything like that, it's not that we're we're going to go through 2 investigations. We're just going to go through one. So if he's investigating us, the council is not going to investigate us. If the council is investigating us, he's not going to be investigating us. So it's either or, right? And they're going to ask you on the exam, what is the key power of the superintendent? The key power is the ability to make rules respecting licensing, right? So he's in charge of all that stuff. And like I said, his main job is to oversee the operations and the activities of the council. So now we're going to do a real estate foundation, and I want you guys to make sure that you put a star beside this one. The real estate foundation is in charge of the law reform, right? And what do? Their purpose is to make sure that the public and professional education is taken care of. They're also in charge of actually changing up our exams and all that, right? And they do a lot of research into real estate as to what the new trends are and what's changing and how they should change up the examination according to that. And there's 5 members on the real estate foundation. It's the Minister of Finance and 4 other members that are part of this, right? And the way the Real Estate Foundation is actually funded is through it's through the trust accounts that we have at our brokerages. So every time we get a deposit, we're going to take it to the brokerage, and the brokerage goes and puts it into a trust account. And the interest that it gets accrued on that money in that trust account is given to these Real Estate Foundation people. And that's how they fund themselves and keep themselves going. And let's see this question. Which of the following is not a power or duty of the Real Estate Council? So something that they are not in charge of, right? So let's look at number 1. It says levying fees on all licenses in order to meet the council's expenses. Of course, they do that, right? That's our licenses, application fee that we pay. That's something that a little bit of it goes towards the council. And number 2, hold disciplinary hearings. Of course, they do that. That's something that they are in charge of doing. But if we look at option 3 and 4, 3 is collecting premiums and assessments from licensees on behalf of the Real Estate Errors and Omissions and Insurance Corporation, right? So that's one thing, right? But that's one thing. But if you look at number 4, sorry, I shouldn't have clicked that, guys, but I gave you the answer. Like I said, law reform is something that the Real Estate Council is not in charge of, right? So you guys should ask yourselves, who's in charge of the law reform? It's actually the Real Estate Foundation who's in charge of the law reform. The council and the superintendent is not in charge of the law reform. So in this case, they are collecting premiums and assessments from licensees on behalf of the Real Estate Errors and Insurance Fund, right? Which I'm going to explain to you guys further. So which of the following is false regarding the Real Estate Council's power to investigate? So a lot of the questions that are going to come out towards you guys is going to be about the council, right? So they're asking us which one is false. Let's look at number 1. Investigate a licensee if they suspected that he or she has contravened in any of the rules. So if we have done something, they can come investigate us whenever they like, right? So that's one thing that they can do. Now, if we look at number 2, conduct an investigation to determine whether a licensee has committed crime before becoming a licensee. Yes, they do. They do this through our criminal record check that they ask us for, right? And they can even investigate into us afterwards when we have our license as well. So between 3 and 4, there's another, let's look at 4. It says investigation into a licensee's conduct, whether or not it has breached the restrictions or conditions of a license, right? So they can definitely do that. But one of the things that they don't need to do is to actually get permission from the court before beginning an investigation. So they can investigate us. They don't need to go to the court to get any type of permission. They can just do it. If they think there's something and we're red flagged or you've done something, then they can definitely look into us. Now, the real estate errors and omissions insurance. So this is kind of an insurance coverage for us real estate agents. It's based on an indemnity plan. And what they do is that if we've done something negligent where we actually didn't mean to cause harm to anybody, the errors and omission can help us out. There's about a $2,000 deductible, I believe, on there, and I think you're covered for $1 million or so. It protects against negligence, performing or failing to perform on the real estate duties. But the thing is, it does not protect us against any type of fraud or criminal matters or any type of dishonesty. It doesn't help us with any type of, disputes that we're having over commission or if we set commission rates or anything like that. And if the real estate agent is selling his or own house. So if I decide to go sell my own property, the usual thing I would probably do is get another listing agent to, from my brokerage to list it for me and be like, whatever about the commission, we don't talk about it. But if I, basically say that I'm going to, sell my own property, the errors and omissions kind of step out of there. Like, okay, well, you know what you're doing. You're not going to be negligent. It's your property, so we're just going to step out of that part, right? So that's why they just don't really intervene in that stuff. Claims for discrimination arising from the complaints, they don't part if you've done any type of discrimination based off anything. They do not, cover you for that. And then, of course, bodily injury, sickness, disease, or death, any of that stuff doesn't, have anything to do with the errors and omissions at that point. So this is just kind of a slide that I believe you guys have it in your book, so you can, look into it further. And it's just the definition as to what the errors and omissions insurance is. The Real Estate Errors and Omissions Insurance Corp document that sets out the insurance coverage and exclusions for real estate license in BC is known as what? And it's actually based off the indemnity plan, right? That's what it's based off of. Like I mentioned to you guys before, this is what the insurance coverage, only for negligence though. Any type of fraud or anything, they don't cover us for that. And then the Real Estate Compensation Fund, this is all about, so it's very simple. It's a very simple thing to understand. So sometimes when we go and pick up, it's not sometimes, it's actually majority of the time, if we have a buyer, we have to go pick up the deposit from the buyer. And, you brought it back to the brokerage, and then the brokerage has deposited into the trust account. And for some odd reason, the deposit goes missing, and nobody knows what happened to it, or, whatever the reason may be. Then you can go to the Real Estate Compensation Fund, and you can they can provide the compensation in relation to a real estate transaction for funds that were misappropriate or mishandled. And now the BC RIA. So this is, like I mentioned, the boss to you guys, all these relationships just kind of came up. And now we're going to talk about the mom, right? Our moms here. So the BC RIA, or the British Columbia Real Estate Association, is a voluntary organization. But even though it's voluntary, but it's actually very crucial to our careers. Reason being is because they give us something called MLS, right? The multiple listing service, right? And it's actually like candy, like the mom gives it to us, right? That's what it is. And what does BC RIA do? And it's a hit or miss on the exam, and maybe on the exam in this sense. What does it do? It's public relations. It takes care of the public relations that we have. Government consultation. They have standard forms that need to be filled out, and they always have ongoing education and advancing the interests of the real estate licensees as well. And the reason they do that is by giving us the MLS, right? And this is where we list our properties. This is where we do our research for properties for our buyers. All that information that we need is listed on the MLS. Now, the mom is supposed to basically teach us manners, right? And ethics. She wants us to be good people. She can't actually fire us from our jobs, right? So she can't just take our license away or anything like that. Same thing with BC RIA or the boards. They actually cannot, snatch away our license. The only person that has power to do that is the council. And the real estate board, all they can do is just basically kick us out of the house. Like the mom can kick us out of our house, right? So we'll get kicked out of one specific board. So if we do something unethical and I was a part of the Fraser Valley board, the board might tell me to leave the Fraser Valley board and I might go join another one. There's actually 11 real estate boards, and you can join either if you get kicked out of one, right? And they are in charge of the code of ethics set by the board. So the moms want us to have good manners. They want us to have good ethics. Same with the board. That's exactly what they want to do, right? The mom cannot take away our license, and basically the way she disciplines us is she takes away the candy. She takes away the MLS access. So let's see this one. The Real Estate Council is not responsible for which one of the following? So the council is not responsible for. So we know that they were not holding hearings to investigate, and the conduct of the licenses is something that they do. They need to hold those hearings, right, if we've done something wrong. They do make bylaws that establish information required on a licensing application. They are in charge of that. So between 3 and 4, we know in that they do educational programs for sure. But one of the things that they don't do is code of ethics. And the code of ethics is done by the boards, right? BC RIA, that's the one who takes care of it. Our moms are the ones who do the code of ethics. Which one of the following among the duties and powers of the Real Estate Council? Something that is one of their powers, right? So in this question, it's establishing a fund for the use of real estate foundation. That is something that's not a part of their power, right? And they are not in charge of the law reform because the Real Estate Foundation is in charge of that, right? So between this one, it's supervising the education qualifications of the licensees, right? That's the one that they are in charge of, or the main one that they're in charge of. So like I said, we have we have the real estate, the RISA, but we also have something called a Redma, which is our second god that we have to be, always looking out for, that we don't get into trouble with them either. So what does Redma do? Redma is actually responsible for new developments. They're actually regulating new developments, right? So if you're a developer and you are trying to sell, or you've built subdivisions or stratas 5 or more, or co-ops, you have to make sure that the purchasers are protected. And the person who has put this in place is the Superintendent of Real Estate. And what he says is that you have to meet the requirements or approvals of the property. So you have to make sure that all the disclosure is done to any interested buyer. So any bylaws, any type of information is on the lot, or any type of information that's on that lot or on that property, it needs to be given to the buyer before the offer is put into place, right? And you have to make sure that the developer has actually transfers the title over to your name after you've purchased it, right? Because sometimes the title gets all weird, right? And then after he's disclosed everything to you, the disclosure statement needs to be filed into the Superintendent of Real Estate. It needs to be filed to him in a form that he's also provided as well. So like I said, right, it's required. Okay, so if it's sold let's just say if there's 5 lots and I was a developer and I just went and sold them to you all at once, 5 lots, then I don't need the disclosure statement. But if I was selling it individually, then it is actually required, right? And it must be provided to the buyer before the offer. And let's just say if the offer does get into, you put an offer on the properties that I was selling and you've put everything in there, you actually have the power to rescind the purchase within 7 days. So you have 7 days to still back out of the offer. So this is a number that sometimes they go up and down with. They play with this number. So make sure you know that it's 7 days. And it must be in the forms prescribed by the superintendent, which I've already gone over with you guys. And it needs to be filed in the Superintendent of Real Estate's office as well. And developers must have a receipt of the disclosure signed by the buyer. The disclosure statement needs to be given to the buyer, of course, and then needs to be filed with the superintendent as well. And it's a good idea for the developer to also keep a copy himself as well. And of course, so what do they say? The council, of course, has, disciplinary actions for us all the time if we're working with a developer, right? So they're saying, like I mentioned to you guys before, that if we're working with a developer, we actually cannot take a secret profit from them, right? So if they think we've done a good job for them, we actually cannot take that and put it into our bags and just kind of run on with it, right? So expecting any remuneration directly from the developer and not from the brokerage in relation to a licensee who was licensed is actually a disciplinary hearing, right? So it's an actual concern for them. So make sure anything that the developer gives you, it goes to your brokerage and then it comes to you, right? Failing to recommend legal advice to purchasers. So if you know a buyer may not, understand fully exactly what you're doing or how you're going about it or what you're saying or what you're selling, it's a good idea, especially if there's a language barrier or something like that, it's a good idea to just, ask them to go seek legal advice elsewhere so that way they're protected. So let's do this question. Assuming a real estate developer is not exempt from the disclosure statement requirements under the Real Estate Development and Marketing Act, which of the following obligations must the developer fulfill? So not exempt meaning that he hasn't sold it at one time, he's selling it separately, right? So let's look at number 1. The developer must provide a copy of the disclosure statement to both the superintendent of the real estate and the purchaser, which seems pretty reasonable, which is what I've explained to you guys right before, right? And then look at number 2. The developer must inform the buyer or purchaser of his right to rescind the purchase agreement by serving the written notice to the developer within 30 days. So first of all, the form isn't for the developer to take away the offer or rescind it. It's actually for the buyer to rescind it, right? And it's not in 30 days, it's actually 7 days, right? And then number 3, the developer must have the purchase price of a development property approved by the superintendent. So if you're a developer, you actually get to pick your own prices. The superintendent doesn't put that in place for you. That's something that you get to choose, right? It's your property, your lot, you get to sell it as whatever way you want, right? And of course, so the developer must fulfill all the above obligations. So we've already determined these 2 are false. This one is true, so this one's also false as well. All right, so this is the last portion of this chapter. So the trust account. So these are every brokerage has a trust account, but there's a trust account for one service. So if your brokerage has a real estate, only selling real estate, they're going to have one trust account for the real estate. If they're selling property management, real estate, and strata, then they're going to have 3 trust accounts, and all the money that's collected from that service will get deposited into that specific trust account. It's not that there's a one trust account for each client. It's actually just one per every service that's there, right? So a brokerage must have at least one bank account in the bank bank. So if our brokerage is selling real estate, they will have a real estate trust account, and all the money that we collect for deposits gets put into there as well. And it's not for each client. You cannot take money out of the brokerage's business expenses or agent's personal expenses. So all that money that sits in the trust account, and you can't, I don't know, make the expenses for the brokerages this month, you can't pay rent, you can't go digging into that trust account. That trust account is specifically to pay off the licensee's commissions and to give it to the real estate foundation. Like I said, brokerage must have one trust account or bank and not for each client. So you cannot withdraw. Withdrawals from the accounts can happen this way. So it can happen by mistake, but make sure you put it back in, right? Interest paid to the real estate foundation, paying the licensees their commission when they've earned it, right? Accordance with the instructions of the principal. So if there's any type of other money, the principal has said to pay out, that's something that could happen out of the trust account. But you do not pull money out of the trust account if your brokerage cannot pay rent for this month. Okay guys, so that was the last topic for this chapter. This chapter is a big chapter, so make sure that you guys know that all the concepts that I've pointed out and all the, the definitions and the questions, you guys go over them. And hopefully you guys are able to do the quizzes. And if you ever need to rewatch something, go ahead and rewatch.